Have you ever made a split-second decision that changed your entire life? Maybe you were in your hometown diner, or perhaps sitting in a coffee shop in your city, when you witnessed something that made your blood run cold. I want you to comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because no matter where you are in the world, we all face moments where doing the right thing means risking everything. The amber liquid swirls in the crystal tumbler, catching the low light of the bar. In 30 seconds, Damon Torino will lift that glass to his lips. In 31 seconds, the most powerful man in the city will be dead, and she will have watched it happen without saying a word. Celia Romano had always prided herself on being invisible. At 26, she had perfected the art of blending into the background, of serving drinks and cleaning tables without anyone really seeing her. It was safer that way, especially in a place like Benedetto's, where the clientele wore $1,000 suits and discussed business in hushed tones that made the hairs on her arms stand up. But tonight, invisibility felt like a curse. The day had started like any other Tuesday. Celia had dragged herself out of bed at noon after finishing her night shift at the bar, grabbed a quick shower, and headed to her morning classes at the community college. Nursing school was harder than she had expected, but it was her ticket out. Her ticket to a life where she wouldn't have to work 3 jobs just to keep her head above water, where she could finally afford her mother's medical bills without choosing between rent and groceries. The afternoon had been spent studying in the library, her textbooks spread across a small table in the corner while she nursed a single cup of coffee for 3 hours. The other students around her seemed so young, so carefree, discussing weekend plans and complaining about professors. Celia envied them, their normalcy, their ability to worry about things like test grades instead of whether the electricity would get turned off. Her phone had buzzed with a text from her mother around 4. The doctor wants to schedule another round of treatments. The insurance is fighting it again. Love you, sweetheart. Celia had stared at that message for a full minute before shoving her phone back in her bag. Another round of treatments meant another $5,000 they didn't have. It meant more late nights at Benedetto's, more fake smiles and aching feet, more pretending she didn't see the things that happened in the back booths after midnight. She had arrived for her shift at 9, tying her long dark hair back and checking her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The girl looking back at her had shadows under her brown eyes and a tension in her jaw that made her look older than her years. She had practiced her smile, the one that earned better tips, and headed out to face another night. Benedetto's was upscale in the way that old money preferred, all dark wood and leather, crystal glasses, and whispered conversations. The owner, Mr. Benedetto, had hired her 2 years ago because she was pretty enough to appeal to his clientele, but not so beautiful that she drew unwanted attention. She was smart enough to listen without seeming to hear, discreet enough to forget conversations that could get people killed. At least, that had been the plan. The trouble had started around 11:30. Celia had been wiping down the bar, half listening to the usual mix of business deals and bragging rights, when she noticed the new server. Gianna was young, maybe 20, with bleached blonde hair and nervous energy that made her hands shake when she carried drinks. She had been hired just last week, and tonight was clearly not going well for her. Celia watched as Gianna dropped a full tray of appetizers near table 7. Then spilled wine on a customer's sleeve while trying to clean up. The poor girl was a wreck, and Celia could see Mr. Benedetto's disapproving glare from across the room. But it was what happened next that made everything change. A man in an expensive charcoal suit approached Gianna near the service station. Celia recognized him as Vincent Castellano, one of the regulars who always sat alone and paid in cash. He was handsome in a cold way, with steel gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. Tonight, those eyes held something that made Celia's skin crawl. She couldn't hear what Vincent was saying, but she could see Gianna's face growing paler by the second. The girl kept shaking her head, then nodding, then shaking her head again. Vincent pulled out a thick envelope and pressed it into Gianna's hands, speaking close to her ear. Whatever he was telling her made tears start rolling down the girl's cheeks. Celia moved closer, pretending to refill the olive bowl while straining to hear. "This is for your brother's surgery," Vincent was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. All you have to do is make sure the man at table 12 gets this specific bottle when he orders as usual. Simple as that. Gianna's voice was trembling. I can't. I won't hurt anyone. Vincent's smile was sharp as a blade. Your brother needs that surgery, doesn't he? Be ashamed if something happened to delay it even further. Accidents happen in hospitals all the time. Table 12. Celia's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Table 12 was where Damon Torino sat with his men every Tuesday night, conducting business over expensive scotch and imported cigars. Damon Torino, who owned half the legitimate businesses in the city and probably twice as many illegitimate ones. Damon Torino, whose reputation for swift and brutal justice was matched only by his legendary protectiveness toward those he considered family. Damon Torino, who was about to be poisoned by a terrified server who thought she was saving her brother's life. Celia felt her heart hammering against her ribs as Vincent walked away, leaving Gianna clutching the envelope and a small glass bottle that caught the light like liquid death. The girl was crying openly now, her whole body shaking as she stared at the bottle in her hand. Everything in Celia screamed at her to walk away, to go back to wiping down glasses and pretending she had seen nothing. She was nobody, just a bartender trying to pay for nursing school. This was not her world, not her problem, not her business. But she couldn't stop thinking about her mother's text, about insurance companies and medical bills and the 1,000 small cruelties that life visited on people who couldn't fight back. She couldn't stop thinking about Gianna, barely out of her teens and terrified into committing murder. She couldn't stop thinking about the kind of man who would threaten a sick boy to get what he wanted. And she couldn't stop thinking about Damon Torino, who in 5 minutes was going to order his usual scotch and die without ever knowing what hit him. Celia looked across the room to table 12. Damon sat with his back to the wall, as always, flanked by 2 men she recognized as his lieutenants. He was younger than she had expected when she first saw him, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair and the kind of presence that drew attention even when he was trying to be discreet. Tonight, he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than she made in 6 months, and he was listening intently to whatever his companion was saying. He looked dangerous, certainly. There was something in the set of his shoulders and the way his eyes constantly scanned the room that spoke of violence held carefully in check. But there was something else, too, something in the way he had helped an elderly woman with her coat the week before, the way he always said please and thank you to the staff, the way he left tips that were more than generous without making a show of it. He was going to die in 5 minutes, and the only person who could save him was a broke nursing student who had absolutely no business getting involved. Celia's hands were shaking as she grabbed a cocktail napkin and a pen. She scribbled quickly, her handwriting barely legible in her panic. Don't drink it. Act normal and leave. Vincent Castellano poisoned your scotch. She folded the napkin twice and took a deep breath. Across the room, Damon was raising his hand to signal for his usual drink. Gianna was already moving toward the bar, the bottle of poison hidden in her apron pocket. This was insane. This was career suicide. This was probably actual suicide. But Celia was already walking. She crossed the dining room on legs that felt like water, weaving between tables with practiced ease. Her heart was beating so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. Table 12 grew larger in her vision until she was standing right beside it, close enough to smell Damon's cologne, close enough to see the exact color of his eyes. They were green, she realized dimly. Not just green, but the deep forest green of pine trees at twilight, and they were looking at her with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice cultured and calm. Celia opened her mouth to speak, and nothing came out. This close, his presence was overwhelming. This close, she could see the small scar along his jawline, the way his expensive watch caught the light, the complete and utter stillness of a predator at rest. Behind her, she could hear Gianna approaching with the poisoned drink. Without another thought, Celia dropped the napkin beside Damon's hand and spun around to walk away. She made it 3 steps before fingers closed around her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her completely. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm, a shock of awareness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way his thumb was stroking gently across her pulse point. She turned back to face him, expecting anger or suspicion or coldness. Instead, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing straight through to her soul. He had unfolded the napkin and read her message, and now those forest green eyes were fixed on her face with laser focus. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Celia," she whispered, then cleared her throat. "Celia Romano." "Celia Romano," he repeated like he was testing how it sounded. "And you're telling me that someone just tried to poison me?" It wasn't a question. Behind his calm exterior, she could sense something coiled and ready to strike. This was what made him dangerous, she realized. Not the obvious physical threat, but this perfect control hiding depths of violence that could be unleashed in an instant. "Yes," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Vincent Castellano. You paid Gianna to put something in your scotch." She's scared. Her brother needs surgery, and Vincent threatened him. Damon's eyes flicked past her to where Gianna stood frozen by their table, the tray with his drink clutched in her white-knuckled hands. For a moment, the girl looked like a deer caught in headlights, and Celia was terrified that she had just signed both their death warrants. Then Damon smiled, and it was like watching the sun come out. "Gianna," he said gently, "why don't you take that drink back to the bar and bring me a coffee instead? Black, no sugar." The relief on the girl's face was painful to watch. She nodded frantically and practically ran back to the service station. Celia started to pull away, thinking she had done her good deed and could now disappear back into anonymity. But Damon's grip on her wrist tightened slightly. "Not so fast," he said, and now his smile included her. "We need to talk." "I have to get back to work," Celia said, acutely aware that Mr. Benedetto was watching them from across the room with growing concern. "Your shift just ended," Damon replied calmly. "Marco, please let Mr. Benedetto know that Miss Romano will be leaving early tonight." One of his companions, a stocky man with kind eyes, nodded and stood up. Celia watched in fascination as he walked over to her boss, spoke quietly for 30 seconds, and apparently settled the matter with a handshake and what looked like several $100 bills. "I can't just leave," she protested weakly. "You can, and you will," Damon said, finally releasing her wrist, but somehow managing to keep her anchored in place with just his gaze. "Because in about 2 minutes, Vincent Castellano is going to realize his plan failed, and he's going to start looking for whoever warned me. Do you really want to be here when that happens?" The question hit her like ice water. In her desperate need to do the right thing, she hadn't thought past the immediate moment. She hadn't considered what would happen after, what Vincent would do when he realized his assassination attempt had been thwarted. She hadn't considered that saving Damon Torino's life might have just painted a target on her own back. As if summoned by her thoughts, Vincent appeared at the edge of her vision. He was scanning the room with predatory focus, his ice chip eyes moving from table to table until they landed on her. For a moment that felt like hours, they stared at each other across the crowded restaurant. Then Vincent smiled, and Celia knew with absolute certainty that she was in more trouble than she had ever imagined. "Time to go," Damon said quietly, and suddenly his hand was on her lower back, guiding her toward the exit with the kind of authority that brooked no argument. His other companion had materialized beside them, creating a protective wall between her and Vincent's calculating stare. As they walked through the restaurant, Celia caught a glimpse of Gianna at the bar, tears streaming down her face as she poured the poisoned scotch down the drain. The girl looked up, and their eyes met for just a moment, and Celia saw her mouth the words, "Thank you," before they reached the door. The night air hit her like a slap, cold and sharp after the warmth of the restaurant. A black sedan was waiting at the curb, engine running, and Celia realized with growing alarm that this had all been orchestrated much more quickly than seemed possible. "Get in," Damon said, opening the back door. "Where are we going?" Celia asked, her survival instincts finally kicking in. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he was capable of, didn't know if saving his life had just signed her own death warrant in a different way. Damon paused, his hand still on the car door, and looked at her with something that might have been respect. Somewhere safe, he said simply. Vincent Castellano just declared war on me by trying to poison me in public. That makes you a witness, which means you're either under my protection or you're dead by morning. Your choice. It wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. Celia looked back at Benedetto's, at the warm light spilling onto the sidewalk and the life she had built for herself one tip at a time. Then she looked at Damon Torino, dangerous and beautiful, and offering her protection that came with a price she couldn't even begin to calculate. But she was already sliding into the back seat of his car, already crossing a line she couldn't uncross. As the sedan pulled away from the curb, Celia caught one last glimpse of Vincent Castellano standing in the restaurant's window, his pale eyes following their retreat. She had saved a life tonight. Now, she just had to hope it hadn't cost her own. The sedan moved through the city streets with purpose, taking turns that seemed random but felt deliberate. Celia sat in the back seat beside Damon, hyper-aware of every detail about him. The way his expensive suit jacket stretched across broad shoulders. The way his hands rested calmly on his knees despite what had just happened. The way he smelled like cedar and something darker, more dangerous. This is insane, she thought, fighting the urge to ask him to stop the car and let her out. She had saved his life, yes, but that didn't mean she belonged in his world. That didn't mean she should trust him just because he had kind eyes and a gentle touch. Your hands are shaking, Damon observed quietly. Celia looked down and realized he was right. Her hands were trembling against her black work pants, betraying the calm facade she was trying to maintain. This is a lot, she admitted. Tell me what you heard tonight, he said. Everything Vincent said to the girl. Gianna, Celia corrected automatically. Her name is Gianna. Damon nodded, filing away the information. Tell me what Vincent said to Gianna. Celia closed her eyes and tried to remember the exact words. He said the envelope was for her brother's surgery. That all she had to do was make sure you got a specific bottle when you ordered your usual. When she tried to refuse, he said accidents happen in hospitals. The temperature in the car seemed to drop several degrees. When Celia opened her eyes, Damon's expression had gone arctic, his jaw set in a way that made her understand exactly why people feared him. Her brother, he said, and it wasn't really a question. She said he needs surgery. Vincent threatened to make sure something happened to delay it if she didn't cooperate. Son of a bitch, muttered Marco from the front seat. Language, Damon said mildly, but there was steel underneath the gentle rebuke. How old are you, Celia? 26, she answered, wondering where this was going. Family. My mother, she said hesitantly. My father died when I was 16. Just your mother. Just my mother. She wondered if she should mention her mother's illness, then decided against it. She had already revealed enough vulnerability for one night. The car turned into an underground garage, all concrete and shadows, and the kind of security that made her stomach clench with renewed anxiety. This was really happening. She was really here, in the belly of whatever beast Damon Torino controlled. Where are we? She asked as the car came to a stop. Home, Damon said simply. The elevator that took them to the penthouse was lined with mirrors and moved with the kind of smooth efficiency that spoke of serious money. Celia caught glimpses of herself as they rose, looking small and out of place in her simple black work uniform. Beside her, Damon looked perfectly at ease, like he owned the world, which she was beginning to realize he probably did. The elevator opened directly into his apartment, and Celia's breath caught in her throat. She had served wealthy clients at Benedetto's, had seen expensive cars and designer clothing, but this was something else entirely. The space was enormous, all floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that looked like art. The view of the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights. Wow, she breathed, then immediately felt stupid for the simple reaction. First time in a penthouse, Damon asked, and there was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. First time anywhere like this, she admitted. He gestured toward a cream-colored leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. Seat. We need to talk. Celia perched on the edge of the sofa, too nervous to relax into its obvious comfort. Damon moved to a bar cart and poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, the same brand he had almost consumed at the restaurant. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "You drink?" he asked. "Not usually." He poured her a small glass anyway and brought it to her, settling into the chair across from the sofa. The distance felt deliberate, like he was trying not to crowd her, and she found herself grateful for his consideration. "Tell me about yourself," he said. "I'm nobody," Celia said automatically. "I work at Benedetto's. I'm in nursing school. I pay my bills." "That's it. Nobody who risks their life to save a stranger," Damon said quietly. "Nobody who thinks that fast under pressure." "Try again." Celia took a sip of the scotch and felt it burn all the way down. She wasn't used to alcohol this expensive, wasn't used to any of this. "I work 3 jobs," she said finally. "Benedetto's 4 nights a week, a coffee shop Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and I babysit for a family in Brookline on weekends. I'm 2 years into a 4-year nursing program. I live in a studio apartment in Somerville that I can barely afford." "Why nursing?" he asked. "Job security. Good money once I graduate. And I want to help people." "Noble," he said, and she couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic. "Practical," she corrected. "I watched my mother struggle when my father died. Medical bills, insurance companies, creditors calling at all hours. I never want to be that helpless again." Something shifted in Damon's expression, a flash of understanding that made her feel exposed. "What's wrong with your mother?" The question was so direct it took her breath away. "Why?" she asked. "You mentioned medical bills. What's wrong with your mother?" "Cancer," Celia said quietly. "Breast cancer. She's been fighting it for 2 years. Treatment going well. She's responding, but the insurance keeps fighting us on the newer treatments. The ones that actually work. We've been going round and round with them for months." Damon nodded, filing away this information like he had everything else. Then he leaned forward slightly, his green eyes serious. "Here's what you need to understand, Celia. Vincent Castellano just tried to assassinate me in a public place. That's an act of war. He involved an innocent girl and threatened a sick child to do it. These are not the actions of a reasonable man." Celia felt ice forming in her stomach. "What does that mean for me?" "It means he's going to want to eliminate any witnesses to his failure. It means he's going to come after you, and he's not going to be gentle about it." "But I'm nobody," she repeated desperately. "I don't matter." "You matter to me," Damon said simply, and the words hit her like a physical blow. "You saved my life tonight. That makes you mine to protect." "Yours," she repeated faintly. "Under my protection," he clarified, but something in his eyes suggested the distinction might be more complex than that. "I can't stay here," Celia said, panic rising in her chest. "I have school, I have work, I have a life." "Not anymore," Damon said gently. "Not until Vincent is dealt with." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes. Days, weeks, months, as long as necessary." Celia stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows to stare out at the city lights. This was insane. She couldn't just disappear from her life, couldn't abandon her responsibilities, couldn't hide in a penthouse while her mother worried and her bills went unpaid. "My mother," she said suddenly. "If Vincent comes after me, he might go after her too." "Already handled," Damon said. "What do you mean, already handled?" "I mean, I have people watching her right now." "I mean, she's safe." Celia spun around to face him. "You can't just make decisions about my family without asking me." "I can, I did," Damon said calmly. "Because while you were worrying about your life and your bills, Vincent was probably already making calls. He's not going to wait until tomorrow to start cleaning up loose ends." As if summoned by his words, Damon's phone rang. He answered it without taking his eyes off her. "Marco," he said. Celia couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but she could see Damon's expression darkening with each passing second. "How many?" he asked. "And Gianna." "I see. Clean up." He hung up and looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "What?" she whispered. "Vincent's people just hit Benedetto's," he said quietly. 3 men with guns, looking for information about who warned me. Mr. Benedetto is in the hospital. Gianna is missing." Celia felt the blood drain from her face. This was her fault. If she hadn't interfered, if she had just minded her own business, none of this would have happened. "Hey," Damon said, suddenly standing and crossing to her. Look at me." She looked up into those green eyes and saw something solid and unshakable. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. "This is Vincent's fault for trying to poison me, and it's my fault for not seeing it coming. But it is not your fault for doing the right thing." "Gianna," Celia whispered. "We'll find her," Damon promised. "She's just a kid." "I know. We'll find her." Celia believed him. She didn't know why, but she believed him completely. There was something in his voice, in the way he carried himself, that spoke of promises kept and protection delivered. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you let me keep you safe while I deal with Vincent," Damon said. "You stay here, you let my people watch over your mother, and you trust that I know how to handle men like him." "For how long?" "However long it takes," he repeated. Celia looked around the penthouse, at the expensive furniture and the city view and the man who had just turned her entire world upside down. She thought about her studio apartment, her 3 jobs, her careful plans for a safe and predictable future. Then she thought about Gianna's terrified face and Mr. Benedetto in the hospital and Vincent Castellano's cold smile. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, I'll stay, but I want to know what's happening with my mother. I want updates on Gianna, and I want to understand what I've gotten myself into." "Done," Damon said immediately. "And when this is over, I go back to my life." "We're clear on that." "Crystal clear," he agreed, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced that would be possible. Marco appeared in the elevator, looking grim but efficient. "Boss," he said, "we've got the mother secured at Mount Sinai. Private room, round-the-clock security. The coffee shop and babysitting family have been contacted and told she's had a family emergency." Celia stared at them both. "You already knew," she accused. "About my mother, about my jobs. You already knew all of it." "I know everything about everyone who enters my world," Damon said matter-of-factly. "It's how I stay alive." "How much do you know?" she asked. "Enough," he said. "I know you're 2 semesters away from graduating with honors. I know you haven't been on a date in 8 months. I know you send half your paycheck to your mother every month and live on ramen noodles. I know you volunteer at a free clinic on Sundays when you're supposed to be resting." The invasion of privacy should have made her angry. Instead, she found herself oddly relieved. If he knew all that, then he knew she really was nobody special. He knew she wasn't a threat or a player or anything other than exactly what she appeared to be. "Rosa will show you to your room," Damon said as an elegant woman in her 50s appeared from what must have been the kitchen. "Anything you need, just ask." "What about clothes?" Celia asked, looking down at her work uniform. "Handled," Rosa said with a warm smile. "We're about the same size." "This is all temporary," Celia said, more to herself than to anyone else. "Of course," Damon agreed, but his eyes were already calculating, already planning, already thinking 3 moves ahead in a game she didn't even know they were playing. As Rosa led her toward the guest wing, Celia caught one last glimpse of Damon standing by the windows, scotch in hand, looking out at his city. He looked dangerous and beautiful and utterly controlled. She was in so much trouble, and not just from Vincent Castellano. Celia woke to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the momentary panic of not knowing where she was. The bed was enormous and impossibly comfortable, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk against her skin. For a moment she lay still, listening to the sounds of the city far below and trying to process everything that had happened. Yesterday morning, she had been worried about her anatomy exam. Now, she was hiding in a penthouse from a man who wanted her dead. The bathroom attached to her guest room was larger than her entire studio apartment, all marble and gold fixtures, and a shower that looked like something from a luxury spa. Rosa had left clothes on the vanity, simple but obviously expensive. A cashmere sweater in soft gray, dark jeans that fit perfectly, underwear that still had tags attached. Even the socks were nicer than anything in Celia's wardrobe. She stared at herself in the mirror as she got dressed. The girl looking back at her seemed like a stranger, polished and put together in a way that felt like playing dress-up. But her eyes were the same, wide and uncertain, and trying to process a reality that felt increasingly surreal. The penthouse was quiet when she emerged from her room, but she could hear voices coming from what sounded like an office down the hall. She followed the sound, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The door was ajar, and through the gap she could see Damon sitting behind a massive desk, completely focused on whatever was displayed on his computer screen. He had traded his expensive suit for dark jeans and a white button-down shirt rolled up to his elbows, and the casual look somehow made him even more attractive. Dangerous in a different way. Marco stood beside the desk, pointing at something on the screen and speaking in low, urgent tones. Celia couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the respect in his voice, the deference. This was Damon in his element, she realized. This was the man who controlled an empire. She was about to turn away when Damon looked up and caught her watching. Their eyes met through the gap in the door, and she felt that same electric awareness from the night before, that sense that he could see straight through to her soul. "Come in," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. Celia pushed the door open hesitantly. "I didn't want to interrupt." "You're not," Damon said, standing up from his chair. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected," she admitted. "The room is beautiful." "Thank you." Marco nodded at her politely. "Miss Romano, I hope you're comfortable." "Very," she said, then couldn't help adding, "Is there any news about Gianna?" The two men exchanged a look, and Celia felt her stomach drop. "We're working on it," Marco said carefully. "What does that mean exactly?" Celia asked. "It means Vincent has her somewhere we haven't found yet," Damon said bluntly. "But we will." The certainty in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her think about what would happen when they did find Gianna, about what men like Damon did to people who threatened their operations. "Are you hungry?" Damon asked, clearly reading her thoughts and choosing to redirect the conversation. "I should probably eat something," Celia said. "Marco, can you handle the rest of this?" Damon asked, gesturing toward the computer. "Of course, boss," Marco replied, settling into the chair Damon had vacated. Damon guided Celia toward the kitchen with a hand on her lower back, that same gentle touch from the night before. The contact sent warmth shooting through her, as she tried to ignore the way her body seemed to lean into his presence without her permission. The kitchen was spectacular, all granite counters and professional-grade appliances, the kind of space she had only seen in magazines. Damon moved through it with easy familiarity, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with practiced efficiency. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. "I cook," he confirmed, setting eggs and vegetables on the counter. "My mother insisted I learn before she died. Said a man should be able to take care of himself and the people he loves." "How old were you when you lost her?" Celia asked. 17, Damon said, cracking eggs into a bowl. "Galaxidon. She and my father both." "I'm sorry," Celia said quietly. "It was a long time ago," he replied, but something in his expression suggested the wound still ran deep. Celia watched him work, fascinated by the contradiction he presented. This was the same man who had calmly discussed assassination attempts and missing girls, but his movements in the kitchen were gentle and precise, almost meditative. He whisked eggs with the same focus she had seen him give to his computer screen. "What about you?" he asked. "How did you lose your father?" "Heart attack," Celia said. "He was working 2 jobs, trying to keep us afloat after the factory closed. One day he just collapsed at the construction site." "You blame yourself," Damon observed. "If I had been older, if I could have worked, maybe he wouldn't have had to push so hard." "You were 16, Damon said firmly. "It wasn't your responsibility." "Wasn't it, though?" Celia asked. "When someone you love is struggling, isn't it everyone's responsibility to help?" Damon paused in his whisking, looking at her with something that might have been admiration. "Is that why you became a bartender?" he asked. "To help your mother?" "Partly, and because I needed flexible hours for school. Benedetto's paid better than most places that would work around my schedule, even though you had to pretend not to see things." "Especially because I had to pretend not to see things," Celia said honestly. "Tips are better when customers feel comfortable." "And now," Damon said, sliding perfectly fluffy scrambled eggs onto 2 plates. "Now I'll probably never work in food service again," she said with a laugh that didn't quite hide her anxiety. Hard to explain a gap in employment caused by hiding from the mob. "The mob," Damon repeated, amused. "What would you prefer I call it?" I prefer you think of it as a family business with diverse interests, he said, settling onto the stool beside her at the kitchen island. Diverse interests, she repeated. That's one way to put it. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, and Celia found herself studying his profile. There was something almost boyish about the way he ate, completely focused on his food in a way that seemed at odds with his reputation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. What exactly do you do? I mean, I know what people say, but what do you actually do?" Damon set down his fork and considered her question carefully. "I own legitimate businesses," he said finally. "Restaurants, construction companies, a trucking operation. I also provide services that other people prefer not to handle themselves." "What kind of services?" "Security, conflict resolution, insurance, you might say." "Insurance," she repeated skeptically. "People pay me to make sure bad things don't happen to them or their businesses. Usually, that means other people decide those bad things aren't worth the risk. And if they don't decide that, then I convince them," Damon said simply. "How?" "However I need to." The words should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself thinking about Gianna's terrified face, about Vincent Castellano's cold smile, about her mother lying in a hospital bed, worried about bills she couldn't pay. "Do you hurt innocent people?" she asked. "Never," Damon said immediately. "That's the line I don't cross." "What about people who aren't innocent?" "That depends on what they've done." "Like Vincent." "Vincent crossed a line when he threatened a child," Damon said, his voice going hard. "He crossed another one when he tried to poison me in public. And he crossed a third when he hurt people you care about." "So what happens to him?" "Justice," Damon said simply. Celia thought about that word, about what justice meant in this world that operated outside the law. She thought about all the times the legal system had failed her family, all the insurance companies and bureaucrats and creditors who had ground them down with complete immunity. "My mother's insurance company," she said suddenly. "They've been denying her treatment for months. The doctors say the new therapy could save her life, but it's experimental and expensive, and they just keep saying no." Damon was very still beside her. "What's the name of the company?" "Pinnacle Health." "But you can't just," she waved her hand vaguely, "fix that." "Can't I?" he asked mildly. Before she could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the display, and his expression went arctic. "Marco," he said, answering immediately. Celia couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but she could see Damon's jaw tighten with each passing second. When he asked, "How many?" "No, keep them back. I'll handle this personally." He hung up and looked at her with something that might have been regret. "They found your mother's room," he said quietly. Celia felt the blood drain from her face. "What do you mean they found it?" "Vincent's people. They showed up at Mount Sinai an hour ago, asking questions. My security moved your mother before they could get close, but the message is clear." "Where is she now?" Celia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safer," Damon said. "A private medical facility that specializes in discreet care. She'll have round-the-clock nursing and the best treatment available." "You can't just move her without telling me," Celia protested, panic rising in her chest. "I can and I did," Damon said firmly. "Because while we were having breakfast, Vincent was escalating this war. Because your mother's life is more important than protocol." He stood up and pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making sure Pinnacle Health understands that denying your mother's treatment is no longer an option," he said without looking up. "You can't threaten an insurance company." "I can't," Damon asked, finally meeting her eyes. "Watch me." The casual confidence in his voice should have alarmed her. Instead, she found herself thinking about 2 years of denials and appeals, 2 years of watching her mother grow sicker, while executives in suits decided that profit margins mattered more than human lives. "I want to see her," Celia said. "Of course," Damon replied. "We'll go this afternoon." You're under my protection, remember. That means where you go, I go." "For how long?" "However long it takes," he repeated, but now there was something else in his voice, something that sounded almost like longing. Their eyes met across the kitchen, and Celia felt that electric awareness crackling between them again. He was dangerous and beautiful and completely outside everything she had ever planned for her life. But he was also the only person who had ever made her feel truly safe, the only person who seemed capable of standing between her family and the kinds of people who would hurt them for profit. The moments stretched between them, charged with possibility and the weight of decisions not yet made. Then Damon's phone buzzed with an incoming text, and the spell was broken. "Vincent wants to meet," he said, reading the message. "What are you going to tell him?" "That he can go to hell," Damon said calmly. "But first, we're going to get Gianna back." "How?" "Very carefully," he said, "and with a great deal of violence, if necessary." Despite everything, Celia found herself smiling at his matter-of-fact tone. "What?" Damon asked, noticing her expression. "I just realized something," she said. "What's that?" "I trust you," she said, surprised by the truth of it. "I don't understand your world, and I'm terrified of what I've gotten myself into, but I trust you completely." "Good," Damon said, and his smile was warm and dangerous and completely devastating. "Because this is just the beginning." The private medical facility looked nothing like a hospital. Nestled in the hills outside the city, it resembled a luxury resort more than a place for treating illness. Manicured gardens surrounded a building of warm stone and gleaming glass, and the parking area held more luxury cars than Celia had ever seen in one place. "This must cost a fortune," she said quietly as Damon helped her out of his sedan. "Don't worry about the cost," he replied, his hand settling naturally on her lower back as they walked toward the entrance. "I have to worry about the cost," Celia protested. "This is my responsibility." Damon stopped walking and turned to face her, his green eyes serious. "Your mother is under my protection now, just like you are. That means her care is my responsibility. You can't just take over my life like this." "I'm not taking over your life," Damon said quietly. "I'm trying to save it." The words hit her like a physical blow, reminding her once again how dramatically everything had changed. 2 days ago, her biggest worry had been passing her organic chemistry exam. Now she was walking into a private medical facility because a man wanted her dead. The lobby was elegant and hushed, all soft lighting and comfortable seating. The staff moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that spoke of serious money and absolute discretion. Celia felt out of place in her borrowed clothes, like an imposter playing at belonging in this world. "Mr. Dorino," said a woman in an expensive suit, appearing beside them as if summoned. "Mrs. Romano is doing very well this morning. Dr. Matthews is with her now." "Thank you, Sarah," Damon replied, and Celia was struck again by how everyone seemed to know him, how his presence commanded instant respect. They took an elevator to the 3rd floor, moving through corridors that looked more like an upscale hotel than a medical facility. The room at the end of the hall had a door marked with her mother's name in elegant script. Celia knocked softly and pushed the door open. Her mother was sitting by the window in a comfortable chair, looking more relaxed than she had in months. The room was beautiful, all warm colors and natural light, with a view of the gardens that made it feel peaceful rather than clinical. "Celia," her mother said, standing up with more energy than she had shown in weeks. "I was hoping you would come." Celia hugged her carefully, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume. "How are you feeling, Mom?" "Better," her mother said with a smile that looked genuine. "The doctors here are amazing. They started me on a new treatment yesterday, something my insurance never would have approved." Celia looked over her mother's shoulder at Damon, who was standing quietly by the door. He caught her eye and nodded slightly, confirming what she already suspected. "Mom, I'd like you to meet Damon Torino," Celia said, stepping back to make introductions. "He's the one who arranged for you to be here." Her mother studied Damon with the sharp intelligence that illness had never dimmed. "Mr. Dorino," she said after a moment. "Thank you. I understand you've been very kind to my daughter." "Your daughter saved my life, Mrs. Romano," Damon replied, moving into the room with that natural grace that seemed effortless. "The least I can do is make sure you get the care you deserve." Celia watched the interaction between them, surprised by how easily her mother seemed to accept Damon's presence. There was something about him that inspired confidence, a sense of capability and protection that transcended his dangerous reputation. "Celia tells me you work in security," her mother said, settling back into her chair. "Something like that," Damon agreed with a slight smile. They talked for nearly an hour, and Celia found herself seeing Damon through her mother's eyes. He was charming without being false, attentive without being overwhelming. He listened when her mother talked about her treatment, asked thoughtful questions about her recovery, and somehow managed to make her laugh despite everything she had been through. When they finally said goodbye, her mother hugged Celia tightly. "I like him," she whispered in Celia's ear. "He's a good man. Don't let fear keep you from happiness." The words followed Celia as they drove back to the city, echoing in her mind as she stared out at the passing scenery. Don't let fear keep you from happiness. As if it were that simple. "You're quiet," Damon observed as they entered his penthouse. "Just thinking," Celia replied. "About what?" "About how my mother seemed to trust you immediately," she said. "About how she looked better today than she has in months. About how you made all of that happen with a phone call. That bothers you." "It should bother me," Celia said. "The fact that it doesn't bothers me more." They settled in the living room as the sun began to set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Damon poured himself a scotch and offered her wine, which she accepted this time. "Can I ask you something?" she said after taking a sip. "Always. Why did you really get into this life? The business, the family thing." Damon was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city lights beginning to twinkle to life below them. "Because the system doesn't work," he said finally. "Because people like your mother get denied treatment by insurance companies that care more about profit than human lives. Because girls like Gianna get threatened by men like Vincent, and the police can't or won't do anything about it. So you decided to become the system." "I decided to become something better than the system," Damon said. "My own version of justice. Even if it means breaking the law." "Especially if it means breaking the law," he replied. "Laws are written by people in power to protect people in power. Sometimes the only way to get real justice is to go around them." Celia thought about that, about the countless times the legal system had failed her family, about insurance denials and bureaucratic delays, and the slow grind of poverty that the law seemed designed to perpetuate. "What about your parents?" she asked. "Would they approve of the choices you've made?" "My father would understand," Damon said quietly. "He was a good man who tried to work within the system, and it got him killed." "Killed?" "Car accident," Damon said, but there was something in his voice that suggested it hadn't been accidental at all. "He was trying to organize a union at the docks. Some people didn't want that to happen." "Oh God," Celia whispered. "Damon, I'm so sorry." "He was everything I wanted to be when I grew up," Damon continued. "Strong, principled, protective of the people he loved. But his principles made him vulnerable. Made my mother vulnerable too. So you decided to be strong instead of principled." "I decided to be both," Damon said, meeting her eyes. "But strong first, always strong first. Because you can't protect anyone if you're dead." The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. She could see the 17-year-old boy he had been, alone and grieving and determined never to be vulnerable again. She could see how that boy had built himself into the man sitting across from her now, dangerous and controlled and utterly committed to protecting the people he cared about. "What about you?" he said after a moment. "You said you haven't been on a date in 8 months. Why?" Celia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You really do know everything about me." "I know the facts," Damon said. "I don't know the reasons." She took another sip of wine, gathering her courage. "His name was Derek," she said finally. "We dated for almost a year. I thought he was perfect. Stable job, nice apartment, seemed to understand about my responsibilities to my mother. What happened? He started getting controlling," she said quietly. "Little things at first. Commenting on my clothes, suggesting I didn't need to work so many jobs, wanted to know where I was every minute. I thought it meant he cared about me. But it didn't. No, it didn't. When I started pulling away, when I told him I needed space, he got angry. Really angry." Celia could feel Damon's attention sharpening, his body going very still in the way she was learning to recognize. "Did he hurt you?" Damon asked, and his voice was deadly quiet. "He tried," Celia admitted. "The night I broke up with him, he followed me home. Forced his way into my apartment. Said if he couldn't have me, nobody could." "What did you do?" "I fought back," she said simply. "Pepper spray and a knee to the groin. Called the police, filed a report. He left me alone after that, but I learned something about myself that night. What's that? I'm stronger than I thought I was, and that I'll never let anyone make me feel helpless again. Good, Damon said fiercely. Good for you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of shared vulnerabilities settling between them. Celia found herself studying his profile in the dying light, the strong line of his jaw, and the way his dark hair caught the last rays of sunlight. Damon, she said softly. Yeah, thank you. For everything you've done for my mother. For protecting us. For making me feel safe. He turned to look at her then, and she saw something in his green eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. Something warm and intense and entirely focused on her. Celia, he said quietly. She set down her wine glass and moved closer to him on the sofa, drawn by something she couldn't name. He watched her approach, his eyes never leaving her face, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Instead, she reached up and cupped his cheek with her palm, feeling the slight roughness of stubble against her skin. Is this okay? She whispered. More than okay, he replied, his voice rough with something that made heat pool in her stomach. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, almost hesitant, like he was afraid she might break. But when she kissed him back, pressing closer and threading her fingers through his hair, something shifted between them. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more desperate, like they were trying to communicate something that words couldn't express. Are you sure? He murmured against her lips. I've never been more sure of anything, she replied, and meant it completely. He carried her to his bedroom with a tenderness that made tears sting her eyes, setting her down gently beside the enormous bed. The room was all warm woods and soft lighting, masculine but welcoming, and she felt her nervousness fade as he looked at her like she was something precious. They undressed each other slowly, with careful hands and whispered endearments. When he laid her back against the soft sheets, she felt cherished rather than vulnerable, desired rather than used. You're beautiful, he said softly, trailing kisses along her collarbone. So are you, she replied, running her hands over the planes of his chest. When they finally came together, it was with a connection that went far beyond the physical. This was about trust and protection and two damaged people finding something whole in each other. This was about choosing to be vulnerable despite every instinct that warned against it. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the soft light from the windows, Celia's head on Damon's chest and his arms wrapped securely around her. She could hear his heartbeat gradually slowing, could feel the tension leaving his body as he held her close. No regrets, he asked quietly. None, she said, pressing a kiss to his chest. You, not a single one, he replied, his fingers threading through her hair. They might have stayed like that forever, but Damon's phone rang from the nightstand, shattering the peaceful moment. He glanced at the display, and his expression went hard. Marco, he answered, his voice instantly alert. Celia couldn't hear the other end of the conversation, but she could see Damon's jaw tighten as he listened. When he asked, how many locations? No, double the security on Mrs. Romano, and put extra men on the perimeter here. He hung up and looked at her with something that might have been regret. Vincent's escalating, he said quietly. His people hit 3 of my businesses tonight. Restaurants, the trucking company, even the construction office. What does that mean? Celia asked, though she was afraid she already knew. It means this war is about to get much more dangerous, Damon said. It means you can still walk away from this, from me, before it gets worse. Celia looked at this man who had turned her world upside down, who had protected her family and made her feel things she had never expected to feel. She thought about her safe, predictable life and the careful plans she had made for her future. Then she thought about the way he had looked at her mother with genuine respect, the way he had held her like she was precious, the way he had shown her what it felt like to be truly protected. I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. We're in this together now. Together, Damon repeated, and his smile was worth every risk she was taking. For one perfect week, Celia allowed herself to believe that this could be her life. She woke each morning in Damon's arms, safe and warm in his enormous bed while the city came alive far below them. He would bring her coffee, and they would talk about everything and nothing, her head on his shoulder as they planned their day. She learned that he read voraciously, that he had strong opinions about art and architecture, that he made terrible jokes that somehow always made her laugh. In the afternoons, while he worked, she studied for her upcoming exams. Rosa had transformed one of the guest rooms into a perfect study space, complete with a desk that overlooked the gardens and all the textbooks she needed delivered overnight. When Damon found her there in the evenings, stressed about organic chemistry or anatomy, he would massage her shoulders and quiz her until she felt confident again. They cooked dinner together most nights, moving around his kitchen with an ease that felt natural despite how new everything was between them. He taught her to make proper pasta sauce. She showed him her grandmother's recipe for bread pudding, and they both pretended this domestic bliss could last forever. But reality had a way of intruding, even into the most perfect bubble. "I have to take my nursing exam next week," Celia said one morning over breakfast, the words breaking the comfortable silence between them. Damon looked up from his coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "When?" "Friday morning. It's a state certification exam. I can't reschedule it again without risking my place in the program." "Too dangerous," Damon said immediately. "I can't just stop living my life," Celia protested. "This exam is everything I've worked toward for 2 years. Without it, I can't graduate, can't become a nurse, can't build the future I've planned." "Plans change," Damon said quietly. "Not this one," Celia replied firmly. "This is who I am, Damon. This is my dream. I won't let Vincent Castellano take that away from me." She could see the conflict in his green eyes, the war between his protective instincts and his respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Heavy security," he said. "My best men, bulletproof car, secured building." "Whatever it takes," Celia agreed. The testing center was a nondescript building downtown, chosen specifically because it could be easily secured. Damon had spent 3 days personally inspecting every entrance, every exit, every possible vulnerability. On Friday morning, 4 of his men escorted Celia inside, while 2 more remained with the car. "I'll be fine," she told him as they said goodbye in the parking garage. "It's just an exam. Call me the second you're finished," Damon said, cupping her face in his hands. "The second you walk out of that building." "I will," she promised, standing on her toes to kiss him goodbye. The exam was harder than she had expected. 3 hours of complex questions that required every bit of knowledge she had accumulated over the past 2 years. But Celia found herself calm and focused, confident in her preparation and eager to prove herself. She was gathering her things when the fire alarm began to wail. "Emergency evacuation," announced a voice over the intercom. "Please proceed calmly to the nearest exit." Celia followed the stream of test takers toward the emergency stairs, her mind already turning toward calling Damon to let him know what was happening. The stairwell was crowded and noisy, people talking nervously about whether there was a real fire. She was halfway down when strong hands grabbed her from behind. "Don't scream," said a voice in her ear, and she felt something sharp pressed against her ribs. "Walk calmly, or people get hurt." Celia's blood turned to ice as she recognized Vincent Castellano's voice. Somehow, impossibly, he had gotten past all of Damon's security. The fire alarm had been a trap, the evacuation a cover for her kidnapping. Her escorts are somewhere in this crowd, but with hundreds of people moving through the narrow stairwell, they would never spot her in time. Vincent guided her toward a service door she hadn't noticed before, his grip firm but not painful. "Smart girl," he murmured as they slipped through the door into a maintenance corridor. "No fas, no drama. Maybe we can keep this civilized." The corridor led to a loading dock where a black van waited with its engine running. 2 more men flanked the vehicle, their faces cold and professional. Vincent pushed her toward the open door with businesslike efficiency. Inside the van, Celia's hands were zip-tied behind her back and a blindfold secured over her eyes. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes from the moment the fire alarm started. "Where are you taking me?" she asked as the van pulled away from the building. "Somewhere we can have a conversation," Vincent replied calmly. Don't worry, Miss Romano. As long as your boyfriend is reasonable, this will all be over soon. The drive felt like hours, but was probably less than one. When the van finally stopped, strong hands helped her out and guided her up a flight of stairs. She could smell salt air and hear seagulls, which meant they were near the harbor. The blindfold was removed in a sparse room with boarded-up windows and concrete floors. It looked like an abandoned warehouse, the kind of place where screams would go unheard. 2 chairs sat in the middle of the space, and Vincent gestured for her to sit in one of them. Comfortable, he asked with mock courtesy. What do you want? Celia said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Well, I've always wanted, Vincent replied, settling into the chair across from her. Damon Torino's territory. His businesses, his connections, his respect. He's been the king of this city for too long. So take it from him, Celia said. Leave innocent people out of it. Vincent laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Innocent? Is that what you think you are? I'm a nursing student, Celia said. I work in a bar. I have nothing to do with your war. You have everything to do with it, Vincent corrected. You're his weakness now, his soft spot, the thing he'll sacrifice everything to protect. As if summoned by his words, a phone began to ring. Vincent answered it with a satisfied smile. Damon, he said warmly, I have something that belongs to you. Celia couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she could imagine Damon's fury, his desperation, his overwhelming need to keep her safe. The thought of him suffering because of her made her chest ache. She's unharmed, Vincent continued. For now. But that could change very quickly if you don't give me what I want. There was a pause, then Vincent's smile widened. Half your territory, he said. The docks, the restaurants in Little Italy, and the trucking contracts. Sign them over to me, and she goes home to you tonight. Another pause. Vincent's expression grew darker. Let me be clear, Damon. You have 2 hours to decide. Every minute you delay, she loses something. A finger, perhaps. Or an eye. I'm very creative when properly motivated. Celia felt terror claw at her throat, but she forced herself to speak loudly enough for the phone to pick up her voice. Don't do it, Damon, she called out. Don't give him anything because of me. Vincent backhanded her casually, the blow snapping her head to the side and filling her mouth with the taste of blood. But she had accomplished what she wanted, had let Damon know she was alive and fighting. 2 hours, Vincent said into the phone. The old pier at the harbor. Come alone, or she dies screaming. He hung up and looked at Celia with cold amusement. Brave little thing, aren't you? Brave enough, she replied, spitting blood onto the concrete floor. We'll see how long that lasts, Vincent said. But as the minutes ticked by, Celia found her courage growing rather than fading. She thought about her mother, fighting cancer with quiet dignity. She thought about Gianna, who was probably suffering somewhere because of Vincent's cruelty. She thought about Damon, who had shown her what real protection looked like. She thought about the choices that had brought her to this moment, starting with the decision to slip him that note at Benedetto's. She could have stayed silent, could have let Vincent's poison do its work. Instead, she had chosen to act, to risk herself for a stranger. And now, sitting in this warehouse with zip-tied hands and blood on her lips, she realized something that surprised her. She wasn't sorry, not for saving Damon's life, not for falling in love with him, not for any of it. For the first time in years, she had felt truly alive, truly valued, truly protected. Whatever happened next, she had experienced something real and powerful and worth fighting for. I love him, she said suddenly. Vincent looked up from his phone, amused. What? I love him, Celia repeated, the words feeling like a revelation. And he loves me, which means he'll come for me. And when he does, you're going to regret every choice that brought you to this moment. Vincent's smile faltered slightly. We'll see about that. But Celia could see doubt creeping into his eyes, could sense his growing awareness that he might have underestimated the forces he had set in motion. Men like Damon didn't build empires by backing down from threats. They built them by eliminating threats completely. An hour and 45 minutes after Vincent's call, the warehouse doors exploded inward. The assault was swift and precise, like watching a carefully choreographed dance of violence. Damon's men moved through the space with professional efficiency, neutralizing Vincent's guards before they could react. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the building, sharp and final. Vincent had his gun out and pointed at Celia's head within seconds, but she could see the fear in his eyes now, the growing realization that he had miscalculated badly. "Stay back," he screamed as Damon appeared in the doorway, flanked by Marco and 3 other men. "Stay back, or she dies." Damon looked at Celia, his green eyes taking inventory of every scratch, every bruise, every sign of mistreatment. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. "Let her go, Vincent. This is between you and me." "You had your chance to negotiate," Vincent said, pressing the gun harder against Celia's temple. "Now we do this my way." What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Marco moved left, drawing Vincent's attention. One of the other men moved right, and Damon simply walked forward, his movements calm and predatory and utterly confident. Vincent fired, but his shot went wide as Marco tackled him from the side. The gun skittered across the concrete floor, and suddenly Vincent was on his knees with Damon's hand around his throat. "You threatened an innocent girl," Damon said quietly. "You hurt people I care about. You declared war on my family." He tightened his grip, and Vincent's face began to turn purple. "This is justice," Damon continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. The end came quickly and without drama. One moment Vincent was struggling, the next he was still. Damon released him, and he crumpled to the floor, another casualty of a war he should never have started. Then Damon was cutting Celia's restraints and pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She could feel him shaking, could feel the depth of his terror at almost losing her. "I'm okay," she whispered against his neck. "I'm okay. I'm safe. I love you." "Never again," he said fiercely. "I'm never letting anyone hurt you again." "I know," Celia replied, and she did know. She understood now that this man would move heaven and earth to keep her safe, would sacrifice everything rather than lose her. As they left the warehouse together, Celia realized that her old life was truly over. There was no going back to the careful plans and predictable future she had mapped out for herself. But looking at Damon's face, seeing the love and devotion there, she found she didn't want to go back. This was her life now, dangerous and complicated and absolutely worth every risk. The first thing Damon did was burn down Vincent's operation completely. Celia didn't ask for details, didn't want to know exactly how he dismantled an entire criminal enterprise in less than 72 hours. But she could see the results in the way his men moved with renewed confidence, in the respectful nods from other business owners when they walked through the city, in the silence where once there had been threats. Vincent Castellano's war was over, and Damon had won it so decisively that no one would dare challenge him again for years. The second thing he did was find Gianna. The girl had been held in a basement across town, terrified but unharmed, used as insurance in case Vincent's original plan failed. When Damon's men brought her to the penthouse, she broke down crying in Celia's arms. "I'm so sorry," Gianna sobbed. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I just needed the money for my brother." "I know, sweetheart," Celia said softly, stroking the girl's hair. "You were trying to protect your family. I understand." Damon arranged for Gianna's brother to receive his surgery at the same facility treating Celia's mother, with all expenses covered and no questions asked. He also offered Gianna a job at one of his legitimate businesses, far away from the restaurant industry and the memories it held. The third thing he did was ask Celia to marry him. It happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after her rescue. They were having coffee in bed, Celia curled against his side, reading case studies for her final nursing exam, when he suddenly went very still beside her. "Marry me," he said quietly. Celia looked up from her textbook, certain she had misheard. "What?" "Marry me," Damon repeated, his green eyes serious and steady. "I know it's fast. I know your life has been turned upside down, but I can't imagine a future without you in it." "Damon," she said softly. "I love you," he continued, the words tumbling out like he had been rehearsing them. "I love your courage and your compassion and the way you see good in everyone, even me. I love that you risked everything to save a stranger, that you chose to stay when staying meant danger, that you fought back when Vincent tried to break you." He reached over to the nightstand and pulled out a small velvet box that made her heart skip. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not just protection, not just security, but a real partnership. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep holding you every night. I want to support your dreams and share mine with you. I want forever." The ring was beautiful, a classic solitaire that caught the morning light and threw rainbows across the sheets. But it was the expression in his eyes that made her answer easy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The kiss that followed tasted like promises and coffee and the rest of their lives. Planning a wedding while finishing nursing school turned out to be an interesting challenge, but Rosa proved to be an invaluable ally. The older woman had impeccable taste and connections throughout the city, and she seemed to understand instinctively what Celia wanted without being told. "Small and intimate," Rosa said one afternoon as they reviewed venue options. "Family and close friends only. Elegant, but not ostentatious." "Exactly," Celia agreed gratefully. "Your mother will want to be involved," Rosa continued, "even if she's still recovering." Celia's mother was indeed recovering beautifully. The new treatment had been even more successful than her doctors had dared hope, and her latest scans showed no sign of active cancer. She was finally strong enough to leave the medical facility and return home, though Damon had insisted on upgrading her to a beautiful apartment with round-the-clock nursing care. "She's going to cry through the entire ceremony," Celia said with a laugh. "Mothers always do," Rosa replied with a knowing smile. "It's tradition." The wedding took place on a Saturday evening in May, in the garden of the medical facility where Celia's mother had been treated. It seemed fitting somehow to celebrate new beginnings in the place where healing had happened. Celia wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly and updated with modern touches that made it uniquely hers. Her mother walked her down the aisle, both of them crying happy tears as they approached the altar where Damon waited. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, his dark hair perfectly styled and his green eyes fixed on her with such love that she felt her knees go weak. Marco stood beside him as best man, grinning widely, while Rosa served as Celia's matron of honor. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, officiated by a judge who had known Damon's parents and spoke movingly about love and loyalty and the courage required to build a life with someone. When they exchanged vows, Celia's voice was steady and clear. "I promise to love you through every challenge and every joy," she said. "I promise to stand beside you as your partner and support you as your friend. I promise to choose us every day for the rest of my life." Damon's vows were equally simple and infinitely more powerful for their honesty. "I promise to protect you without controlling you," he said. "I promise to love you without trying to change you. I promise to give you everything I have and everything I am, freely and completely, until my last breath." When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Damon kissed her with all the passion and tenderness she had come to expect from him, the small gathering erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held in the facility's elegant dining room, transformed with flowers and candlelight into something magical. Celia danced with her new husband to a string quartet, feeling like she was floating in a dream too perfect to be real. "No regrets," Damon whispered in her ear as they swayed together. "Not a single one," she replied, echoing their conversation from that first night they made love. 6 months later, Celia stood in the bathroom of their penthouse staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test, her heart pounding with excitement and terror in equal measure. She had graduated from nursing school with honors and started working at the children's hospital that Damon had quietly funded the expansion of. The work was challenging and rewarding, exactly what she had dreamed of during all those long nights at Benedetto's. Their life together had settled into a rhythm that felt natural and right. Damon had been true to his word about expanding his legitimate businesses, gradually moving away from the darker aspects of his empire, while maintaining the respect and influence he had built over years. They cooked dinner together most evenings, talked about their days, planned trips and renovations, and 1,000 small details of building a life together. It was domestic and peaceful, and everything Celia had never dared to hope for. And now there would be a baby. She found Damon in his office, reviewing contracts for a new restaurant venture. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, his face immediately brightening. "How was work?" he asked. "Good," she said, then took a deep breath. "But I have something to tell you." She set the pregnancy test on his desk without a word, watching as understanding dawned in his green eyes. "Really?" he asked, his voice soft with wonder. "Really," she confirmed. The smile that spread across his face was radiant. He stood up and crossed to her in 2 quick strides, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around before setting her down gently. "How do you feel about it?" he asked, searching her face. "Terrified," she admitted. "Excited. Happy. Completely overwhelmed." "Me too," he said, pressing his forehead against hers. "All of that." That evening, they called her mother to share the news. Her reaction was exactly what Celia had expected: tears and laughter and immediate plans to start knitting baby blankets. After they hung up, Celia and Damon sat on their sofa, watching the city lights twinkle to life below them, her head on his shoulder and his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "Do you think we'll be good at this?" she asked. "Parenting, I mean." "I think we'll figure it out together," Damon replied. "Just like everything else." Celia thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, starting with a split-second decision to slip a warning note to a dangerous stranger. She thought about all the choices that had seemed terrifying at the time, but had led to more happiness than she had ever imagined possible. "Have you ever taken a chance on love that seemed completely impossible?" she said suddenly, addressing the question to anyone who might be listening. "Maybe you met someone who was completely wrong for you on paper, someone whose world seemed too different from yours to ever work. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments, because sometimes the most dangerous choices lead to the most beautiful destinations." "What are you thinking about?" Damon asked. "Everything," she said. "How this all started with me trying to do the right thing. How scared I was that first night. How impossible all of this seemed. And now I can't imagine any other life," she said honestly. "Even knowing everything that would happen, all the danger and the fear and the uncertainty, I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat." "Good," Damon said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me." "I love you," she said, the words still feeling like a miracle. "I love you too," he replied. "Both of you." Outside their windows, the city continued its endless rhythm. But inside their penthouse, time felt suspended in perfect contentment. Celia closed her eyes and listened to the steady beat of Damon's heart beneath her cheek, feeling safe and loved and exactly where she belonged. The dangerous choice she had made that night at Benedetto's had cost her the life she had planned, but it had given her something infinitely more valuable in return. It had given her love, real and deep and lasting. It had given her a partner who would protect her without controlling her, who would support her dreams while sharing his own. It had given her everything she hadn't even known she wanted. And as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had become her whole world, Celia Romano Torino knew with absolute certainty that some risks were worth taking, some dangers were worth facing, and some love stories were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seemed at the beginning.